Mi Chamocha, quickish, recapish. Looking at the verse of Mi Chamocha be'elam Hashem, Mi Chamocha neder b'kodesh, who is like you among the Elim. The general idea is there another existence? Is there another power aside from God? Or not? And God's the only power, so how does that account for all the different levels that we have within creation? What is each one capable of? What's the whole idea? The general thing we get that everything, even what we see in the physical world, we're all attached all the way through. Even the physical existence has a spiritual source going all the way up. Well, it's a chain. We call it the chain of creation. But we're not just here. There's a whole progression, a very ordered progression of what happens for us to get into existence. And we're still attached all the way through. Because like a chain, the links stay attached to each other. Anything you do, there's a whole ripple effect that goes upward or downward. So beginning with the idea of looking at who is like you among the Elim, we had different commentaries on it, but we came to the conclusion of Yonatan ben Uzziel and Onkelos that when we say that who is like you, we're just saying there's nobody else except for God. Not just that no one can compare to God, but there is nothing but God. What does it mean there's nothing but God? We have a world that was created. Aren't we all here? So what are we doing here? And you can't say like, oh, the world doesn't really exist. Like there is no spoon. You can't, there is no spoon in the world. Because if you do that, then like Torah mitzvahs, what's your pitch then? What are you arguing for? This is all irrelevant because we're not really here. So are we here or not? So we have the general idea that we go through that God is alone in all of creation. We know idolatry, saying that there's no deity that's equal to God, is definitely out. Is there such a thing as shituf, which is partnership? Has God created many deities to help him? And these deities have their own free choice. God gave them the power. You're now the noble in charge of this department, and don't bother me. Let them come to you and you'll decide if someone's worthy. Did God give the sun power of shining light, and then you're in charge of light now? Which is what a lot of the nations... Shituf was kind of part of the path to idolatry. Oh, look, the sun gets to choose if it's going to shine its light. And then it was like, no, we should just worship the sun only indirectly. So a lot of the texts that we have, philosophical texts, of saying that there can't be anything except for God. There is only him. Even the angels with all the powers and being spiritual beings, they're also from him. Being from him means that it's totally nullified to him. And nothing has a power without him. Where do we get the idea that there's no such thing as shituf? From Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. God is one, even though within the multiplicity, he is only one. It all under him. More texts from philosophers to highlight and underline this. Rambam, and it's the counting of the mitzvahs. This is where we have it. It falls under this, that God is singular alone. The Jewish people bring down that singularity, that oneness, into the plurality of creation. Going back to the Hanukkah thing, we declare this world as a private domain, not a public domain. Public domain, there's many masters. Private domain, there's only one person in charge. And we declare the world's a private domain. We ended up going through the different heavens, even with all the creatures within all the different heavens, etc. It's only God. God created all these heavens are part of the process of different things. One acts as a curtain, one's where all the snow is, one's where the angels are, etc. A lot of text there. Then we come to this question, which we return to it. Where was earth created from? Oh, he took the snow, which was under his throne of glory, and he threw it down. The question on the question, what do you mean where the earth come from? It says, God spoke, let there be earth, let there be a world. Where did light come from? God wrapped himself in a talus. Well, what is that supposed to mean? God said, let there be light, and there is light. What are these questions? We even have a sicha. Let there be light is not just let there be light, let it be light, let it be lit. The mission statement is to light up the world. This eventually brings us all to the whole thing of mazel. Mazel, which is like the flow of things. That every aspect in creation has a spiritual source. We start off with the grass, went to the Kabbalah, we went through all the thing with the leaves having their spiritual source and the angels that represent it. Angels are like plants because plants experience tremendous growth. They go from a seed to a big tree, and angels go from being these robotic created beings to the point where they could totally submit themselves to God's will, to the point that they could actually be called by God's name when they're on a mission. Here also, we have this thing about the four kingdoms. Domim Tmeach Chai Medaber. Domim is silent. The God force in it, we don't see it. Tmeach, growth. Chai is alive. That's really the animals. Medaber, man is speaks. Why does man speak? Because the epitome of man is when he leaves his own self. And that's what speech is all about for somebody else. More texts about how angels are the supernal, the higher source of trees and plants, etc. Then we got to the whole part with the rooster. And here it crows, and it's like, wake up, praise God. In the higher worlds, it's Malach Gabriel. Angel Gabriel is like, wake up, time to praise God and study Torah. And God, who's mourning the base of Mikdash, is like, I will delight now in these that are studying Torah. And then the highest realms, that's Malchus of Atzilos, fill up, fill up, fill up, fill up. And then at night, it's going to start going to dispense the life force that it got. And the crowing are the Gvuras, the five severities of Bina, saying, hey, time to go back up again. And we all know where those five severities come from. Now, the five organs of speech, because sound is going to come out of your throat, but what forms it into a sound? The different organs that are part of speech. Guttural sounds, the tongue, the palate, the lips. It's considered severity because it gives it a specific form. Instead of it just being free-flowing, remember all the time they would do the right side is kindness, the left side is gvura, strength, discipline, fear. The right side is water. Water flows, it just gives. That's why chesed, kindness, is like water. It just gives. Ultimate kindness just gives. There's no arbitration going on. Everybody have goodness. Versus fear or awe, discipline, is like fire. Fire is about going up, not going out. Remember we learned about Or, which is light, and Keli, a vessel? The Jewish people had to go through the iron crucible of the Exodus, so that way they could bring light into the world. And they also had to prepare the world to receive light. That's what happened at the giving of the Torah. Yes, remember this? Each Maamar feeds into the next. It's almost like they're all talking about the same stuff here. It's the same idea. The sound that you're making is kind of like the light, and the shape that you give the sound is like the vessel that holds it. The letter that you give it is the vessel. When you put a bunch of letters together, you've now created a vessel of a word. Because you can have a bunch of letters just hanging out, they don't say anything. But when you put them together into a word, that word is now a vessel for whatever the word is trying to convey. Sometimes if I think about it hard enough, it kind of makes sense. If you break up those letters, then it doesn't say anything anymore. So the fact that it says something very specific means that it's now a vessel. That's why it's considered something like severity or restriction, because this says this specifically. So when I make a form, if I give it a sound, a letter, I've given it a very specific form. I've restricted it, constricted it to a very specific form. And that's the letter. After the rooster, we get to the general idea that even though, we have a rooster here and up there talking about souls and angels, Malchus and Atzilus and all this higher realms, how do we get a rooster down here? It doesn't look like the souls and Angel Gabriel studying and learning Torah and delighting in God up in Gan Eden, or in the higher realms. How do we get here? Even though we have higher spiritual sources and they progress, devolve to come down to a lower spiritual form, that still doesn't make the jump to the physical world. The only thing that can make the jump from the spiritual world to the physical world is the God factor. Cause and effect means the cause is your starting point and the effect is the result that comes from it. The effect, even if it's very far removed from the original cause, is still related to each other. Cause would be like if I want to sit and think about a goal that I want to achieve, and then the effect would be all the way down. It could eventually end up being achieving that actual goal. The action may not look like my original thought, but they're still rooted in each other. This would be all the spiritual realms devolving. So it's still a spiritual entity that we ended up with, even if it's a much lower spiritual entity. Getting to a physical entity, it doesn't work. You can't get that from a spiritual entity. It's not even made up of the same stuff. Physical matter needs matter. Spirituality doesn't have matter. That's how it's spiritual. Who can make that jump? Only God can make that jump. That's when we got into this whole thing with Sheleg, snow, that he took the snow, going back to, how was the earth created? From the snow under the throne of glory. Shin Lamed Gimel 333, hundreds, tens, and units. How is the world created? Through the tenthing of the divine light. Till eventually, we get to the lowest point, and now we can make the jump to physical creation. This attribute of Malchus is what creates the world. Malchus, which is speech, because being a king means they need something outside of yourself. Yesod really takes in from all the attributes. So the last one, foundation, takes in all the attributes. And then it gives it over to Malchus. And Malchus now becomes the starting point for what comes next. It's just saying that this is the attribute that creates everything. But it's also because, if you look at the four worlds here, these 10 attributes are within these four worlds. Malchus of Atzilus, Malchus, which is the lowest level of Atzilus, which is that highest realm, that's the first point of giving over to the next world. Everything feeds into it, and now we're ready for the next world, which would be Bria, the third world, or the second. You look at it in that direction. That light that Malchus of Atzilus has, the initial light that's going to be going down and to keep getting contracted. By the time you hit the fourth world, it still has the original light. It's just a highly contracted version of that original light. The root of the beginning is at the bottom, basically. The beginning is wedged in the end, because your starting point is only realized once you're finally finished. And now you can see what the original intent was. If I want to build a house, my intent is not realized until the house is actually built. Then you're like, oh, now I see what you meant. Now I see what your original desire is, once it's actually done. Even though thought of a house and the actual building of a house are so far removed from each other, but it's only once it's done that I'm like, oh, now I see how it goes. Then we went back to, where did the light come from? Hashem wrapped himself in a talus, the white cloak, bright light, etc. Again, why are we talking about all this kind of stuff? Also speaking about how there was the bright light and then the general gradations, or the concealments, etc. it had to go through before we could make the final leap to the physical world. Then we went through this whole thing about Eliyahu Hanavi, Elijah the prophet, talking about hidden master of the world. First of all, God is so removed. The essence of God is so far removed from all the world. And all these things that Eliyahu Hanavi is telling us, he's giving us full description about the way the progression works. Chesed is the right arm, Gvura is the left arm. We're able to see how it fit onto the human body, those attributes. Adam Kadmon is considered the primordial world. Remember the word Kadmon? The Yam HaKadmoni, primordial sea? Adam, I think last time I said it's person, but it's not. It's the original world. I actually learned about it in something else this week. I'm like, wait a second, Adam Kadmon, that sounds familiar. Everything ties together. So Adam Kadmon, even the word of man that we call man Adam, comes from the word of Adama, which means ground, because man was made from all the dust on the four corners. But Adam also comes from the word of Adam el-Elyon. I will be similar to the one above. Dome is to be similar to. So it comes from that same root of Adam el-Elyon. Adam Kadmon It's the primordial likeness. It's even higher than the world of Atzilus. So we have the four worlds. There is the world even before the world of the highest world. You learn something and it's like, by the way, there's more to this. Now that you finally got it, figure this out and we set it all down. Ta-da! More levels! Hooray! Adam Kadmon is considered the primordial world. Primordial likeness. It's so close to Galus, it's like almost not even considered a creation. Even more than Atzilus, the highest world. That's like the glow around the sun. It's even closer than that. So we learned about how the light goes through the world, still from Eliyahu, and then we got to this thing about how the creation of the physical world can't come from cause and effect. We have to have the leap of something from nothing. Yesh me'ayin. And yesh me'ayin can only happen when God does it. And then we returned to something we've learned before about Tzimtzum Arisha, the first contraction. First, God had to create a space, a void, and then within that void, the light was able to shine through it. Now we could start with creation, the kav, they call it. The kav means a line. Now we get to the lion. Similar to what we learned with the rooster, we're not going to talk about the spiritual source of the lion. So a lion's spiritual source is in the divine chariot, from where it eventually evolves, then jumps to become a physical predator. The divine chariot of Yecheskel, which we're going to look at the verses now describing it. Q, chariots of fire. Ezekiel has his vision of I saw a chariot and lions and angels, and Chassidus Kabbalistic teachings take this, and it's not just this random vision of a chariot. He was actually seeing the higher worlds. The commentaries in general, this is what we're talking about. We're seeing the higher worlds. Here, especially in this Maamar, it's not just the higher worlds. We're seeing the source for so much of what goes on down here below. Even the lion, the physical predator, would have to go through the gradations. It has to go through the cause and effect of the contraction of that original light, but it can't become the physical predator without the jump. To be a something from a nothing. You need the God factor to create a physical being from a spiritual source. See, it's also, you can ask the question in reverse. If I have a spiritual source, why am I not a spiritual being? Why am I a physical being? We're not spiritual beings. We should be, because spiritual just goes down. How do you all of a sudden get physical matter from spiritual? I thought spiritual is not physical. Because God created the world something from nothing, nothing being spiritual and something being us, the physical world. God made the jump. So you're still attached to your spiritual source. God linked you to become a physical being. So this is from the beginning of Yecheskel, the beginning of the prophet Ezekiel. He wanted to make a statement with his prophecies. Let's talk about our visions. Chapter 1, verse 4 we're at. The opening verse, by the way, if you're like, oh, where are the other verses? And I saw the vision, it just sets the stage. But now we're going to jump into the actual vision. And I saw, and behold, a tempest was coming from the north, a huge cloud, and a flaming fire with a brightness around it. From its midst, it was like the color of the chashmal, from the midst of the fire. Translating like that because it's not specifically a good translation of that word chashmal. Don't worry about it. Next, and from its midst was the likeness of 4 living beings, and this is their appearance. They had the likeness of a man. He's seeing 4 living beings with his chariot. And the likeness of their faces was the face of a man, and the face of a lion was on their right, to the 4 of them, and the face of an ox to their left, to the 4 of them, and the face of an eagle to the 4 of them. 4 living creatures, and one has the face of a man, one has the face of a lion, one has the face of an ox, and one has the face of an eagle. Now imagine you just have to read this by yourself. You're like, what is going on here? But we know, because we have learned so much now, we are learning about the spiritual sources of all these things. And the likeness of living beings, their appearance was like fiery coals, burning like the appearance of firebrands. It was going among the living beings, and there was a brightness to the fire, and from the fire came forth lightning. If you look at the Hebrew, it says chayos. We're translating it as living beings, because that's a literal translation, but chayos is really a type of angel. There's many different kinds of angels. Here, we're going to see 3 different kinds of angels. Chayos, Aphanim, and Seraphim. Seraphim, seraph angels, are very high level of angel. We actually saw it already. Remember we talked about the cedar trees. Ophanim are another level of angel, and Chayos are another level. It's a lower level of angel. We actually have it in paragraphs leading up to the Shema. It talks about how each of these angels sing God's praises. Seraphim understand a little bit more. So when they say Kaddish, 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 holy, 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 they're saying separate, separate, separate. They're saying God is so far removed from us, we can't even understand it. And the Ophanim and the Chayos, these other levels of angels, they don't have the same comprehension as the seraph angels do. They make loud noise in their proclamations. You thought there was a lot going on just around here. There was a lot going on in the world. So these are the different angels. And part of what he's seeing, it's not just saying like I saw living beings, it's I saw these kinds of angels with these sorts of faces. And the living beings would run and return like the appearance of the sparks. Bazak they translate as the bazak, but here it's also the sparks. Here you see again, chayos. It's that term again. We're saying living beings because Chayos is from Chaya and Chai, which means to life. So the living beings, but it's all, again, it's a kind of angel. I don't know if you recognize this, but Ratzov Vashov, chapter 50 in Tanya, where it talks about how a person can be filled with a burning, fiery love for God. So all they want to do is just expire in the godness. They just want to run forward and expire in the godness, but you got to pull yourself back and stay in this world. You love God so much against your own will that you want to just be part of the goddess. You got to stay here because this is the world where God's will is fulfilled. More versifications. Vera Chayas Vihine Ofan. See, look, Ofan. Ophanim, that's another kind of angel. Echad Baratz Etzel Achayas Darbas Panav. And I saw the living beings, again, Chayos. And behold, one Ophan was on the ground of the firmament beside the living beings for its 4 faces. Ophan, there were some places they were translated as a wheel. Like Ophanayim is a bicycle, because it has 2 wheels. Some of these terms, they're the double meaning to them. We're talking about a chariot that's got wheels on it, and the wheels were on the ground. And here it's like, no, we're actually talking about the angel. The Ophan was on the ground. Tarshish, the parents of the Ophanim, and their work was like the parents of chrysolite. Don't even know what that's saying. But again, so Ophanim, not just wheels, we're talking about the Ophanim are kind of angel. Chayos are kind of angel. Ophanim are kind of angel. I don't think we see Seraphim here, but we've learned about Seraphim already in this Maamar. And when the Chayot would go, the Ophanim would go beside them. And when the Chayot would lift themselves off the ground, the Ophanim would lift themselves. It's describing now the movement. The movement of the angels, the movement of the chariot itself. Maamar Kiashar Ol Rosham Kamar Even Sapir Demus Kise Val Demus Sakise Demus Kamar Adam Alav Milamala. You see, we actually skipped a couple of verses. And above the expanse that was over their heads, like the appearance of a sapphire stone, was the likeness of a throne. And on the likeness of the throne was a likeness like the appearance of a man upon it above. First we have angels with a man's face, an ox, a lion, and an eagle. And now there's a throne. Something's hovering over this all with the appearance of a man. Like the appearance of the rainbow that is in the cloud on a rainy day, so is the appearance of the brightness round about. That was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of Havaya. So let us see. As we've said before, every physical creature has a higher spiritual source from which it receives life force and existence. Their being physical characteristics is synonymous with this spiritual source. We all have a spiritual source. It's not just the spiritual source is just, okay, this is what your light bulb looks like. They feed each other. The spiritual source, what you look like here physically, it's a reflection of what your spiritual source is. That's why when it talks about the foliage and the leaves that die quickly, etc., it's like there are angels that don't stay in existence for a long time. Down here, you have leaves and foliage that don't live for very long, versus the ones that stay and maintain the existence of the world, etc. What did the rooster look like and the crowing and all that kind of stuff? So here we're seeing the source of basically all the rest of creation. All living beings are from the angels of the divine chariot. That is their source. Eagle is the spiritual source for all birds. The lion is the spiritual source for all beasts. And the ox is the spiritual source for all animals. The lion and the ox, they are the Chayot angels. That's indicative of Gevura. Gevura and strength. Gevura, which is fear and discipline. But if you remember also, Gevura is the left side. The left side is the side of fire. Right side is the side of water. Left side is the side of fire. That's why they're described as burning like the appearance of torches. Here it says firebrands, not torches. Lapidim, I'm going to change that to torches. You know what that is? Lapidim, Devorah, her husband, Lapidot. It comes from the same thing because they used to bring these wicks, the very thick wicks. They bring it to the Mishkan, the Lapidot. So, Lapidim, the torches. The Chayot, it says they're burning like the appearance of torches. The Seraph angels, the Gachle Eish. It's in the same verse, like fiery coals. Burning, we're seeing the imagery of fire. Physical animals evolving from these angels are strong and powerful. Their flesh is red, which is the color of anger/severity. This is what we said above here, that every creature has a spiritual source, and it's not just that. The physical characteristics are synonymous with the spiritual source. The lion and the ox, which represents basically all animals. The beast kind of animals and the animals. They are the Chayot angels. This is the side of Gvura. This is the fire side. Fire is red and it burns. These animals, their flesh is red. The meat of them is red, which is indicative of the color of anger, severity. You think of these animals, these are strong and powerful animals. A lion and all the beasts, the ox and all the other kind of animals. Strong, powerful beings. Kind of like fire. This is what their source is. This is where they're rooted in. As if that wasn't enough, the souls of the Jewish people are also from the chariot. Which soul do you think we're speaking of? The godly soul, which is Adam, it talks about created in his image likeness on the throne. Demus. Demus means image. It comes from the same root of Damet. Yigdal. Ein lo demut oguf. Demut is an image. You're not allowed to make an image of God. There is no image of God. But here it's talking about a likeness that was on the throne. So what is that likeness? That's the godly soul comes from there. Because man is created in his image. That's what the verse tells us in Bereshis. B'Tselem Elokim were created in his image. V'ikra Elokim es Adam b'Talmo, b'Tselem Elokim bar oso, Zachar nekeva bar osam. And God created man in his image. In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them. Created man in his image. in the image of God He created him. Same word it's using for the likeness on the throne. It's like, oh, this is the source now. This man entity, this likeness of a man that's sitting on the throne, that's where the godly soul originates. Okay, it originates even higher, of course, but in these realms, that's where it originates from. The descent of the godly soul to this world goes through the light within the sphere, so it has to pass through all the thing, passes through the chariot, specifically the human face on the chariot. The chariot is part of the progression down to this world. And the animals, we see which animals come out from each of the faces. And man, our godly soul comes from man, and it has to go through all the progressions until it comes to us. Remember also when we learned all the way back in chapter 2 about how different ones have to go through longer journeys? And some people get like the express train. The longer the journey, the more veiling it is, so you have less sensitivity to holiness. Yes? Does that sound familiar? The animal soul is rooted also in the chariot. It's actually considered a lowly derivative of the Chayot angels and originates in the face of the ox. Kind of makes sense, does it not? Because when we describe what Torah mitzvahs do for the animal soul, we're talking about yoking the ox. You have to take upon yourself the yoke of heaven, because you can have an ox and you can have a field and it's not worth anything if you don't harness the energy. We already covered all the plant life and all that kind of stuff with the angels, and now we're covering all animal and man life. Foul animals and man. All of it rooted in the chariot. You know what else comes from the chariot? The negative forces are also sourced from this prophecy. The storm wind and cloud of blazing fire. This is the root of all the negative energies in the world. Klipa, remember that word? Klipa and Sitra Achra? Tanya uses this language. The limited form of life force reaches the klipa by descending degree by degree through myriads of levels in the chain-like descent of the worlds in the manner of cause and effect. Remember we said it's derech ha'charaim, it's like behind the back. God doesn't want the negative forces to exist, the other side to exist, but he has for freedom of choice. So where does he source it from? Not from greatness, it's sourced from these raging storms. The higher level is the cause for the lower level, which emerges from it, cause and effect. However, in a descent sequence of cause and effect, the lower effect is always comparable to the cause. No matter how numerous, such descents are insufficient to produce the low-level life force of klipa. It's only possible through tzimtzum. You have to have this degree of contractions, etc., for even that to come into effect. Wrapping it all up, then we'll get back to the line next time. This is from Tanya, talking about where do these negative forces come from. The storm wind and the cloud of blazing fire. Tzimtzum ram smat kol kach ha'or v'achayos mi'et achar mi'et ach yachal tzamtzem l'slabish b'chines gals. The vitality, as in the life force, descends also through many tzimtzumim. Tzimtzum means contraction. That's the light tenthing, or contractions. Oh, look, it says it right there. Or contractions, and this process diminishes the light, so it's incomparably lower than its original state. We can't even imagine the light that we have. We're like, oh my God, the world's here. It's so tiny compared to God's great light. Even the higher levels of light, it's so tiny. The light and life force are so diminished until they're able to be contracted and clothed in a manner of exile, as in the object of enclothing masters of light. When the spark of God is in something, it's like an exile, because it's trapped within it. And the only way it can be untrapped is if we redeem it. We have to take away the shell and the peel, and we have to elevate it. The vitality, you could say the life force, the light, is thus in a state of exile within that object, which considers itself separate from holiness, giving it life and existence, something from nothing, so it does not return to its original state of non-existence as it was before it was created. This light of God is now trapped in a physical entity that does not recognize that God is the creator, doesn't recognize that God is it, even though that this life is what's giving it life, and it's like what allowing it to exist. There's something from nothing. This is why this world, as in our world that we live in, with all it contains, is called the world of klipos and sitra achra, despite the fact that this world too receives its life force from God's holiness. So even though this world is only here because of God's light, even all the tenthing that goes on, we wouldn't be here without God bring us to existence, is still considered a world that's dominated by Klipa and Sitra Achra. They are dominant forces. Why does the world always seem so crazy? Why does everything seem like so much darkness? Because they are dominant forces. They cover, they entrap, they exile the light of godliness that brings the whole world into being. Then again, obviously our job is to free the light, make the world light. All that is not surrendered to Hashem, but considers itself separate from Him, receives its vitality, life force from the Acharaim of godliness. As in, behind the back, Acharaim means God's like, by the way, here, take it. Versus like, here, have this. It's like, whatever, take this. But we have numerous descents and various contractions. And it's also coming from an outer part of God versus the more internal part of God. The divine life force is concealed within in a state of exile, thus it belongs to the realm of Klipa. We're summarizing what we've done. It is now clear why any thought, word, or action not directed towards serving God, hence not surrendered to godliness, is a garment of the animal soul that derives from Klipa, even if that thought, word, or deed is not actually evil. This is something that the Alter Rebbe brings in when we talk about chapters 6, 7, and 8. We say Zevlin said this opposite this, the world is created, and the animal soul has all the same faculties as the godly soul. One thing that the Alter Rebbe brought in is I used to think, the proverbial I, used to think that if I'm not doing something that's not specifically holy, but it's not specifically bad, it's fine. I'm doing something neutral. Who cares if I do something neutral? These chapters tell us that doing something neutral is still not necessarily good. It's trying to drive us that everything you do should be for God. Because as long as you're doing something that's neutral, you're not tapping into holiness, you're tapping into klipa. You're tapping into the shell. You're just keeping stuff in its shell. You're not redeeming it and letting it go free. Yes, you didn't do anything bad, specifically, but you also didn't actively do something good. Not actively good. It wasn't actively godly. That's why Tanya goes through all this. Tanya wants us to be the best version of ourselves and not just like, oh, after you pass away and they're going to weigh your deeds, you're going to be 70-30 and that's fine. You go to Gan Eden. Tanya wants us to be the best version of ourselves down here, to refine ourselves. Doing neutral stuff is still not good enough. Ultimately, what it wants is that everything we do, like our entire day, should be driven just, what can I do for God? How do I make this for God? Everything about God, 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 God. That'd be your godly soul talking also. Like you put it in control and it's like, forget it. All day long, just God, 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 God. But now that we see where the source of it is from, the storm winds and the fires and etc., even the things that are neutral, they're not specifically godly. And anything that's not specifically godly is something that separates itself from God. So, Ella, the klipot are divided into two categories, one lower than the other. The lower category consists of 3 completely unclean and evil klipot, containing no good whatsoever. In the prophet Yechezkel's vision of the divine chariot, in which he saw and described the forces that conceal godliness, they are described as a storm wind, a great cloud, and a flaring fire, representing these 3 holy unclean klipot. The Alter Rebbe says there's 2 levels of klipot, and this one, the lower ones, there's 3 of them. They cannot be elevated. Food that's kosher, but you eat it for the wrong reason, it gets degraded. But if you do tshuva, if you eat it for the right reason, you take the energy for the right reason, you can elevate it. Certain things can't be elevated. That's why it's forbidden. Something is forbidden, it doesn't just mean like, oh my God, this is so evil. It means can't be elevated. Asur means bound up, mutter means unbound. Something that's permitted is something that we could elevate because it's not tied down. Something that's forbidden is because it's tied down. We can't elevate it. This would be rooted within the storm clouds, etc. That's the root of all the forbidden klipos. Versus the other klipa, which is not expressly forbidden, it's covered over, it's shelled, it's shellified. So according to how we use it, that depends on whether or not it can be elevated. We see how even here, these are spiritual sources for so much that's going on in the world. For us, for all these creatures, all the animals that exist, and even for the birds, and even the negative force is all rooted in there. But all of them, like everything else that we've spoken until now, they have a higher source that they're from. Then they're going to go through all the contractions and all the gradations till finally they're going to be ready to make the jump to the physical world. Even once we become physical creations, we still have our root in the spiritual source. But if you notice, one thing that everything has in common is the God factor. Spirituality comes from God, and even though spirituality will do its cause and effect contraction, you can't get to a physical world without the God factor. We can't be here without God. We can't be here without being tied to God. We think we exist. In the meantime, we're just rays of the sun attached to the sun still. We're like, no, look, you can't see our tether. If you see the sun and you see sun rays down here on Earth, where's all that sun? I don't see it traveling through space. Obviously, the sun ray detached itself from the sun and went through space without being connected. Well, that would be a foolish thing to say. It's just, once you get to the atmosphere of our Earth, something happens to distort the light so we could actually get a sun ray. So, spiritual source, we can't see what happens in space. We can't see how that light moves through all these different spiritual levels. And then something happens before this physical realm to quote unquote distort that light so that now we can have sun rays. Now we can have physical creation.